For example, these young kids here, they gather every week and do their rollerblading and a bit of dancing around and so on. But the first thing is when the police tell us at Speaker's Corner that we can't gather, that we can't speak because we might gather people. And yet here you have a group of people, the police know they're here every single week and they gather. Now I'm fully in favour of them gathering. But you see, the hypocrisy of the story is that if you speak, you're going to gather. And we offered to speak at 2 meters distance from each other, and the police basically just immediately threatened to arrest us. And so here you have a perfect illustration of the fact that the police are arbitrarily picking on people who are trying to exercise their political rights rather than gatherings. So they're not actually bothered about gatherings, they're bothered about something that might appear to undermine the image. You might turn around and say, okay, well that's justified because you can't have people protesting against things and so on. And a lot of people, of course, will say it's primarily justified because the pandemic allows government to do pretty much whatever it wants on that front. One other aspect to this, of course, is that this is one of those areas of London where you get people who are very wealthy walking around. People who are very wealthy walking around, so the catchment area here is Mayfair, Knightsbridge, Belgravia and that sort of thing. And as I pointed out last week, that's connected historically with the events of the 1855 riot, which followed the cholera epidemic at the time, where people gathered in this part of the park to observe how the wealthy abide by the Sabbath, which actually was wrong, it's the Sunday, but anyway, it doesn't matter. See how the wealthy behave on a Sunday, and they found that the wealthy were breaking all the rules that were imposed on the working classes. So as I say, I am fully supportive of people being able to go out, meet outside, even in the worst conditions of the pandemic, that they would have the right to meet outside, to gather, to sit in groups, to have open air events. I've been in favour of that all along. Now, I will be having a bit more detailed discussion with Martin in a short while. For now, I'll just give you images of the park. So you can see that the regulations being applied in that part of the park, Speaker's Corner, are totally different to the regulations applied in this part of the park.
Yeah, I stopped using it because you don't move.
It's so funny how they recognise each other though, isn't it? It's so, Frenchies are so funny, they always recognise their own food and they get so excited. Like, she loves food, and Frenchies are Frenchies.
Like, so mine are armies. Oh my god, they're so cute. Right, you come in.
so funny because well, Gary originally.
Not bad. You look older today. Happy birthday.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Happy birthday.
What's the procedure?
Well, actually what we're thinking of doing is having more of a discussion.
Are you doing an interview, Hyde?
I think we should do more of a discussion than
Yeah. How do I turn that round?
turn it
Just
around.
yeah.
Just have the wobbly thing there.
Oh, is that-
no, not that one.
Go on. Always have this
That
problem.
one.
Oh, is it that one there?
That one should turn it around. Yeah.
Right. Okay. There you
That's
go.
it.
Yeah.
That's it.
We're having a discussion. Can I ask some questions?
Yeah, I think we should
Yeah.
maybe, because they're going to expect us here.
Yeah.
So I think maybe move along a little bit. And then
Yeah.
and talk as we walk, if you like.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Do you want me to? fire away with a couple of questions?
Do you want me to? Oh, both, so you
I
could
don't
talk and
mind.
feel free. But what happens is I need to
No,
put
they
this
got your
away.
bike then, haven't you?
I'll park
You
it
should park your
somewhere.
bike, okay.
I'll park it
I don't know
somewhere.
how you can organise my camera as well.
No, it's fine.
Okay,
Good
okay.
idea. Maybe
Yeah.
just park your bike anyway if you want.
Okay.
And then
Sorry, we're just working out a plan here.
Logistics,
What we're
see.
doing is not
in case we get raided.
allowed.
I don't think it's going to happen. I went through there,
Isn't
and
it
there's not that many people there at all.
cops, I mean.
Yeah.
There weren't that many out there either, no.
So, and as I'm looking, I don't see many either.
No, I
so,
don't think so either. But I think they would come if you start speaking. And
yeah,
in
if you draw
cases-
attention
Well,
to
what
it.
I'm concerned about is plain clothes police. That
I thought
would
that
be
as well.
my
I thought
concern.
that as well, but
You know, that's highly possible
Okay.
because last week Heiko did announce that it was going to be here this week.
yeah, that's true. But I mean, okay. One person speaking at the moment is not that significant anyway. So
Yeah.
it's not the decisive issue. It's bloody freezing time to do a talk. So better if we just do interview discussion, that sort of thing. I think.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you can just play it by ear. I
Yeah,
just,
we got the new year, haven't we?
yeah. I mean, I would love to speak. I haven't spoken for like a long time,
Yeah, absolutely.
and I'd love to make a little speech here. But as I just told my Facebook followers, I don't want to be arrested. You know, I mentioned to you once.
Well, it's no fun. Again, I repeat this thing: when you get arrested, you know, firstly the police bundle you.
Yeah.
And so if any of them had anything, you know, if it was as contagious to make out anyone had anything, of course you could catch up the police. Secondly, put you in a van in a little perspex box about 3 foot
Yeah.
by 4 foot, well, by 5 foot by 3 foot, something like that. Which
You were mentioning
it
that-
would be a petri dish of transmission if someone had it who
exactly.
came in before you. So it's literally farcical. The approach they're taking.
Well, I saw some.
Which is typical of the entire approach during the pandemic on pretty much every issue. Pretty much every issue.
I saw some of the anti-lockdown protesters at Clapham Common on film yesterday. There's some footage of it, and I noticed that the police were harassing lots of people that were not even part of the demonstration. They just harassed anybody who looked like they might be. So that would have been people like you, me, because of my clothing perhaps. But what I noticed, sorry, I was just going to say...
There were no more people
Yeah.
on that demo yesterday.
No,
than
not
there are
many.
walking past us
Yeah,
now.
you are right. But what I
The density was
noticed,
much less.
is that when one policeman approaches somebody, confronts somebody, about 6 other policemen surround. Yeah, I mean, so if the virus is that contagious, which I'm sure it is contagious, but if it is that contagious, why are they doing that? Why are they risking just innocent members of the public. Well, some
For the
should be
greater,
innocent.
their argument, of course, is it's for the greater good. So if we repress a few wackos who think that the pandemic is a scandemic or a pandemic, then of course, how you doing, all right?
Okay, good. Hiya.
Surviving, yeah. Then of course, you know, if they crack down on them,
Yeah.
then of course it might, as they say, as this guy used to say,
Have we got-
encourager les autres.
I've just
We
realised
have.
that everybody's got the same idea. They're all this is
I'll
unreal.
tell you what I got, and this is quite a funny thing. Just
What I
before
mean is
Christmas, and I think the person who gave it to me might be over there. But I got this in the post, a packet in the post, just before Christmas, and it's a funny little machine I got through the post. And this machine here, it was after I got arrested a number of times by the police, and we made this thing, you know, a bit of a joke out of it, and so I got sent this in the post, and there's a funny machine. I looked at it, what on earth is this? And it's got one button on it, switch on. And when you switch it on, it goes like this. Was that you? Did you make that?
Just going to show you this guy. Can I show them your...
Anyway, it's funny that someone sent me the post and said, "Oh, thank you very much," and so on. And this is what you. This was for you. It was a Christmas present. So, anyway, where were we, Martin? Where were we?
Oh, I've lost it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I don't
Well,
know.
why are they doing it? And I think it's just, you know,
Sorry,
stop
I-
others from being encouraged.
when you're doing yours, can you come in closer because you have a
Yeah.
big space between you? Make it look professional at least.
Yeah, I'm
'Cause
going
you're like
to
you-
try and get on again,
Stop
but I
others-
don't
stop
have a
others
lot
from
of
getting-
data.
Stop others from getting
Because I
from
want
getting encouraged. That's the idea.
So I'm going to
right?
try one more time, but it did go off.
Because
So ask me,
how do you want it? Because you can go from here,
Yeah.
a walk, or you go from here to the bandstand,
Yeah.
or just a
I think
walk.
of a
So you
walk
walk, just a
along
walk.
Yeah,
I think,
walk
okay.
by the birds. No one's going to.
But what happens is if you do yours, it's gonna.
No, I won't do it.
Okay.
I won't do it because I've run out of battery anyway.
Okay.
Oh, no.
Okay, fine. You.
Good morning, or good afternoon. I'm a bit frazzled. Why is it that the Priti Patel says she's going to crack down hard on everybody now? It's going to
Well,
be.
that's what I was
it's gonna
saying.
be-
It's they're saying French to encourage the others who had deals made with the government to arrange the contracts on PPE, on testing, equipment, and so on. And if people go and protest about these things, there's a danger. You know, the idea that protests are causing illness has never been proven. You know, it's supposed to be, you know, there's a place called Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine. I agree with a lot of what they've been writing during the course of this pandemic. Not everything, but a lot of it. And, you know, that's what we need, is evidence-based analysis. And what is the evidence? Did people catch the virus on Black Lives Matter? Did people catch the virus on the A-level algorithm protest? Did people catch the virus in Bournemouth Beach in the summer? Does anybody here catch the virus in Hyde Park? Well, if they were concerned about that type of thing, then they could, you know, have a track and trace on entering the park, couldn't they? I'm sure a lot of people here have got track and trace, but that's not what happens. The police are...
Is that the police for short? The green van.
Hello, mate. Following your question.
When they come, should they switch it off or turn it away, or they will use? I didn't see that, so that's why I.
No, that was wrong, bad. Sorry, Mike.
Okay.
It wasn't. Well, I'm actually just talking today about this. So I thought there were some people at the other end, weren't there? Small kind of people. Small handful, yeah. I mean, I'm actually just talking today. The reason being that a friend of mine died, we assumed from coronavirus this week. And so because of that, I thought it would be a bit out of order for me to make a speech in this moment like that. You know what I mean? I thought instead of it, we'd go over the different issues that have happened during the course of the last year. And, you know, like I said, Mark, you know, I ran through with Martin quite a lot of these discussions over the last year. Remember that in March, on the 8th of March last year, I spoke at Speaker's Corner and I said, you know, I warned ferociously about what was going on and said that, you know, X, Y, and Z precautions should be made. I then worked on the base of trying to look at the evidence around the world as to how the vectors of transmission take place of the virus, which I assumed was completely accurate. It turned out that in the Heinsberg study in Germany, led by Heinrich Streeck from Bonn University, they found out that actually transmission takes place often inside the home or at so-called super spreader events. The primary thing in super spreader events is air ventilation. Now, I know for a fact, and it was proven also by the Centre of Evidence-Based Medicine, that in October they made a study of transmission inside hospitals, and they calculated about 25% of all transmissions are taking place inside hospitals. And I know that for a fact because I have a friend of mine who's a doctor at a hospital. I won't mention where because they are threatened if they say things, but she told me, this was about 2 months ago, that on Saturday they had one person, by Wednesday they had 100 people infected, and by and by a week later there were 250 people infected.
They're stopping.
They're stopping. Okay, then move on.
That would suggest within the police force they should have a high contagion rate because they're all advanced.
I agree, and I think the reason for that is quite simple, and that is that I think the police have low contagion rates because they're relatively healthy. Relatively healthy, I said. I didn't say very healthy. I said relatively healthy, and
Like, I want to be a son. And I don't have Gina.
I can't see behind me. Are we being followed?
No, it's not.
I can't. No. No. Okay. Okay. Thanks.
So my own calculation is this. The general just asked me about the police. There are 140,451 police officers in the British police force. There are about 3,000 extras on top of that, but 140,451. In August, I believe it was, 881 had said to have caught the infection. None had died, only one retired police officer. And so the argument there connects in with the argument about T-cell immunity. So if you're relatively healthy, and I qualify that, relatively healthy, your T-cell immune response to previous coronaviruses will be quite strong. And it will mean that it will fend off the virus relatively easily. And so I'm guessing that most police officers didn't even notice they were infected.
We're talking about the police officers because they're going to be
Yes.
contacting the general public on a regular basis. They're going to be
So the likelihood is
exposed to a very wide.
that's right. So they are like herd immunity in Britain. They're like a mini Sweden in Britain, but without the restrictions you've got in Sweden, because the police had no restrictions at all during the peak of the pandemic, and so therefore they are evidence, very strong evidence, and I don't know any studies done on it, but they are very, very strong evidence that a form of herd immunity developed amongst the police extremely early without any measures to stop them catching it.
Okay, we would also see this in the healthcare professionals,
Well,
although they are coming in contact with a large number
it is
of
slightly
very
different
ill people.
because inside the hospitals, one is the transmission, the danger in the hospitals, and that's the problem. And as far as the information I've got as to my friend who died, Mick Brooks, on Friday, as far as we know, it was an ill. He really did not go out, and it seems to be that the illness was caught in a swimming pool just before Christmas, and now that seems strange because I'd seen discussions in Germany with Alexander Kekulé from Halle University, where he discussed the possibility of catching it in a swimming pool, and he said, well, in the swimming pool area you couldn't really get it, but possibly inside the changing rooms you might be able to get it, because they have very little air movement, and if someone was in there and perhaps shouted or coughed, and you happened to come in relatively quickly after that person, or it became aerosolized for some reason, it might be possible to catch in those environments, and we can't explain it otherwise.
Swimming pools, extremely high humidity.
Right, but in the changing rooms, I'm saying.
Yeah, but even so, in that sort of environment.
Well, I know these people. There's only two of them, and like I got told what happened, and they'd not. It's the only place they could have caught it. So.
Any underlying illnesses?
Yes, he had underlying.
Can I ask you?
He had underlying, but he did have respiratory problems sometimes, but not very often. He did have a stroke this year. It was relatively mild. He was recovering. He also had some kind of blood cancer. So he had comorbidities. He was vulnerable, but he did try to protect himself in that vulnerability. I wouldn't personally, even though I've said for many months that I believe the pandemic was basically over. I seems
Yeah,
I'm
that's
wrong.
what I was going to ask you, because you did say.
But I'm saying this.
So it's good.
I said this
good
not.
that you-
I said this not because
You're prepared
I'm
to-
an expert on the pandemic, but because I had seen a number of experts from Gupta to Yeadon to Dvorak and others who had claimed this. Now, I do believe.
Could they not be wrong about what's going on now? Could you be wrong?
Well, I'm giving you an update of what I think. It's obviously slightly amended, but it's amended in this way. I still think it's correct that the data on the number of people who've got the cases in Britain is false. I still think that's false.
So
But what is interesting?
60,000 a day or
Yes,
something.
I think this is nonsense. I think this is
It's not
nonsense.
possible. Are you a doctor?
No. But if you look at the statistics, they're saying 60,000 cases per day with a detection rate of 21
Yeah.
to 1. So they have to test 21 to get one positive case, which means they're going to have to be testing over 1 million a day. And they're not doing that.
Well, they're doing about 2.5 million a week. They're doing extremely large numbers of tests. The quality of the tests have gone down. One of the testing companies, I said this morning, I think it's called Nanotech Research Limited, or something. There's a piece about it in the Financial Times today, and or better said in Private Eye, it was underneath the Financial Times in the comments section, and it showed that this is a private company with no experience in doing these things. That suddenly, the director, one of them was a property developer, the other one was a shoe salesperson, and they suddenly got a contract for millions of pounds. And so the quality of the tests being carried out by these type of entities can be false. What I do believe, however, is that those people who are in hospital and are seriously ill, have comorbidities, and catch it in hospital are in real danger. So there will be a significant number of deaths that occur because of that. And then there is also the fact that what it seems to be the case, and this was what was so strange, was that some people posted memes, and they say, well, the common cold's disappeared, pneumonia's disappeared. Now it is, because the data in Britain shows the number of excess deaths of coronavirus has gone up like this, and the number of excess deaths from other respiratory illness has gone like this, almost in direct parallel, day by day. Now, Wolfgang Wodak, one of the leading experts who exposed the swine flu pandemic in 2009, and he was in the Council of Europe, he was the head of the investigation. He argued that each year, viruses of one type or another, the flu, various cold viruses or flu viruses, cold viruses, and coronaviruses. Coronavirus is always between about 7 and 15% of all the colds that we get every year. The coronavirus season is now. It's about December to March. That's when the coronavirus season comes. For the four normal coronaviruses, but evidently also for this coronavirus. And so what happens is that it may well be that this coronavirus this year has ousted all the others. They fight. They're in a battlefield for control over, if you like, in inverted commas, the marketplace for respiratory illness.
Can I ask you about lockdowns? I'm curious to know whether you think there's any advantage whatsoever in locking down the whole country like we are.
I mean, even some of the most sceptical people in the world, experts in the world like Hyde and so on, I said, well, at the beginning, I thought, why not? You know, we don't know how deadly it is. It might seem logical, which is what I said at the beginning. But my knowledge was far lower than someone like Eden. I didn't know about T-cell immunity. I didn't know anything about that at the time. So I mistakenly said what is still the current doctrine, which is that there is no immunity, apart from those who've had it, and even then we don't know if they're immune. I mean, this is nonsense. And so lockdown appeared, obviously, people always cite New Zealand and so on. New Zealand locked down later than Britain did. But it's true they stopped the airlines coming in. It might be fun. Maybe New Zealand did succeed in doing that. I don't know. New Zealand's a specific case. And it's in a specific location with, you know, they had a bit of tourism. They do have a lot of Chinese people living there.
Also, their seasons are 6 months out of date.
Also, don't forget that was late summer when they locked down. Late summer was March 23rd. I think the 27th they locked down. Which, okay, late summer, early autumn, depending where you are in New Zealand, could be quite warm still at that time of year. Could be quite cold down the South Island in you know, Dunedin way and all that sort of thing. That's true. But overall, the idea that lockdown is going to be beneficial, I think, is completely false. And I think, again, the evidence needs to be analysed, both from, for example, categories who do not abide by social distancing, like the police. And I think you'll find that's the case everywhere in Europe. There needs to be like a pan-European study of the police. How have the police, what's the prevalence rate amongst the police? What's the antibody rate amongst the police? How many of them came down ill? How many were tested? How many had whatever vaccines? I mean, everything about the police should be studied. Because as far as I can see, in the British police, there were hardly any police infected. Or any police ill, seriously ill, and none died, apart from this one retired officer. So that's one category of investigation. The other category of investigation that needs to be done is communities like, I mean, I've been told from Mexico, my son's in Mexico, in the wealthy areas, everybody's got masks on. In the poor areas, no one. And they're all not social distancing, they're all not, you know. And I'm of the belief, I haven't got the evidence because no one's studied. In fact, you won't find information about these places that are not distancing at all because they don't report it. But if you look around the world, I got a cab last week with some of them. Eritrea, I said, is anybody abiding by these things? He said, no, of course they're not.
In the tropics.
Of course that's true. Having said that, I also, at the very beginning of the pandemic, I brought out charts and graphs showing that there was a path across the northern hemisphere, which was the zone in temperature and climate that was the most likely zone to be affected, and that was roughly between 5 and 11 degrees centigrade and so on. Some Chinese experts have made a study of the climate relationship to the spread of the pandemic. Now there's a subsequent study being made, which I'll make available underneath this video, which shows that there's also this longitudinal divide, so this way and this way, but there's also some in South Africa. But South Africa is still very low comparatively with most of the European countries. But there is this area, a band that covers Peru, Mexico and Brazil as well. And Brazil, of course, and Mexico are tropical countries, but they're exceptions to the rule in that, you're right. Because most tropical places, for many reasons that are quite obvious, because the virus doesn't, like in the summertime here, the virus suddenly dropped, right, in the summertime. So if this illness suddenly dropped in the summertime, there must be some reason. Must be some correlation. The only real fact, and they all said that from the beginning, in the summer we'll be able to cope, flatten the curve, summer will be here, problem solved. That's what they all said. So, it's not something I'm making up, it's what's widely accepted.
If the vector is essentially aerosols, then in the summer it's lower humidity, higher UV, very, very strong.
But some places, like Malaysia, has got very high humidity, very low numbers. Thailand, the argument, and this is where the mythology comes in. And I said this very early on when people were criticising Sweden at the very beginning. I remember standing in the park, I was on my own at the time during the early phase, it must have been April or so. And people were criticising Sweden. I said, that's not right, you shouldn't criticise them. And in fact, the Chinese didn't either. The Chinese said each country can decide what they do themselves. Because otherwise, how are you going to have a compared control group? If you don't have a control group, then you can't make any statement about lockdown succeed or not. If the whole world locks down, how do you possibly know what would happen if you hadn't locked down? And so the only way we can do that now is to go back and look what places did not abide by these things and what the consequences were for that. But having said that, I mean, right back in 1854, when the cholera pandemic broke out cholera pandemic hit London, They went into Gordon Square, they made a study of 800 houses, and they made lots of decisions about what needed to be done to stop disease. It wasn't just stopping cholera. Cholera actually was waterborne, but they thought it might be in the air. So that's why, you know, the victuals and we put things in front of their face. So the consequence of that was that they made large improvements to the general ventilation of buildings. Now, ventilation is perfectly logical. If I've got a flu and I'm in the same office as you and you haven't got the flu, I can give you the flu. That's quite easy. Everyone knows that, right? And so ventilation has been known for months, and yet nothing has been done in the hospitals. Nothing has been done in buildings where people are working to make sure the ventilation, and it's not difficult to do. You can put in a ventilation system like in the airlines, where you change the air 6, 7, 10 times an hour. And if you do that, you slash the rate of transmission of any such virus that is transmissible in an aerosol form.
Certainly within modern buildings, the air change rate is a couple of times an hour.
Yeah, but it should be
It can be
6
a lot
to 9.
higher, but certainly in aircraft it's not.
Right.
It's almost not.
No, in aircraft it's 6 to 9 times an hour, and that's
At the moment.
yes, and that's why. I mean, Alexander Kekulé, I can quote on this. That's my source, and he does a program on German radio. He's a microbiologist and virologist at Halle University. And he's quite mainstream, reasonable expertise. But he's always every few days they ask him lots and lots of questions from the public, and he answers them reasonably well. I mean, I don't agree with everything he says, but you know, you won't agree with anyone, do you? I mean, people pick and choose from what they hear according to what they think is right and how they're approaching the thing. A lot of people at the moment, unfortunately, do not have open minds on any questions, and that's the main problem. Is that people have lodged themselves into a particular camp, and then are incapable of accepting any argument by anybody else. You know, the beauty about us like Speaker's Corner, from all the different backgrounds we come from, is we're actually quite open-minded. Even though we're quite firm in our mind on whatever it is, we're actually pretty open-minded about everything else, you know.
We've negotiated, we've argued ourselves into a position. A lot of people haven't, they've just swallowed it whole.
That's right.
They've got no basis for their beliefs.
It's fear, it's paranoia and fear.
That's where we are now.
Yeah. And the paranoia fear is dominant now, there's no doubt about it. That's why it's cold today anyway. It's not really worth my while making a show out of this. And for the reasons I said, I don't want to do it today. But if we were to do that, the police will come down heavy. And no one's going to stand there backing us. Because at the moment, the atmosphere's been created, you know, you're a playground and a killer. Well, it's quite a way away though, isn't it? It's quite a way away, yeah.
Thanks.
Well,
Yeah, Heiko, there's a police car coming. It's not
no,
near
it's a way
us,
away.
but
Way
it's
away.
on.
Are there any other points you'd like to make? I didn't want to talk for too long.
Asymptomatic transmission.
Yeah, well-
you said before
well-
that it wasn't possible to be
Well,
spread by asymptomatic.
I mean, I have.
do you go back on this thing
I don't
about
go
super,
back on
super,
it.
super
I don't-
spreaders?
I don't go back on it. The evidence simply isn't there to justify this argument. I saw the government posted something on Facebook this morning claiming 30% of people are asymptomatic. I think the figure's much higher than that. 30% of people are asymptomatic and they are spreading the virus. Well, firstly, the government has always taken a position that's not the case. Why? Because they said, if you've got symptoms, get a test. And I remember Matt Hancock, he was going, too many people are coming forward and getting tests who haven't got symptoms, right? So it's a very simple logic behind it. If you have symptoms of an infection, it means, for example, you have an irritation in the throat. The irritation in the throat is a manifestation of the multiplication of the virus in your body, which causes you to need to expel. And that expulsion through sneezing, coughing, and so on, is how that transmission takes place. And the quantity of a high viral load being expelled increases, which means what you transmit to someone is also a high viral load, and therefore they can come down ill with
The
it.
police are just
That's
there.
all. I mean, Boris Johnson and Matt Hancock are omniscient. They never make any mistakes.
Yeah.
Everything they've done is right from the beginning. They've always followed the science. The science is always, been correct.
Yeah.
And therefore, when they've done that, then they'll claim victory, and then they'll promote certain freedoms again.
Yeah.
But of course, those freedoms will be circumscribed by the capacity of the states to reimpose regulations and rules which are dictatorial on the population almost at will.
Now, some people are confined to their homes. They won't leave their homes. And as you know, there's a... We're going that way, yeah.
No, I think there's something.
You want to go that way?
No, I think there's something.
Sorry, Heiko, I was asking you a question.
Sorry, I think there's just look at the bottom.
Oh, I see. Don't let us be too What do you say to the people confined in their homes, afraid to go out? They've been manipulated by the media to be really afraid to even go to the supermarket. So they have delivery service, and some of them haven't left their homes since March.
People who have got serious illnesses, they should be cautious.
Yeah.
Those who have not got serious illnesses should be less cautious. These are known knowns, if you like. We know that people who've got one or two comorbidities are in danger of getting the illness seriously or of dying. We know that. But then you have to always weigh that. I mean, we are logical human beings. We have to weigh up comparative dangers in everyday life. I mean, your children touch a pigeon. Can you get a disease off a pigeon? Yes, you can get diseases from pigeons. We always used to say, oh, flying rats, and look what they're doing, At the same time, does that mean you prevent every child from picking up a feather off the floor? Probably not.
But by the same token, most people come in contact with pigeons indirectly.
Well, this is
So you have an
that's
inbuilt
correct.
immunity because your immune
That's
system
correct.
is actually dynamic.
You see, one of the
It's not
dangers,
static.
one of the other dangers that's not even mentioned normally, is that if you have had a society which has been cooped up and segregated for a year, which is what we've had,
Sanitized,
then
sterilised.
our immune system has been compromised by that, because all the minimal little things that we would get from large-scale encounter with each other, we will not have had. It won't have been, for example, escalating slowly. You've got one type of bacteria, you pass it to everyone else. We get a small little stomach bug one day from it, or that type of thing. Well, I'm just example, but that type of thing, as it spreads within the normal parameters of society, it would spread quite widely. Now it won't. So you see, what you'll find is when lockdowns end, you'll get other types of illnesses that suddenly affect people that they wouldn't have got.
Children and teenagers is probably a bigger effect.
Yes, it will, and particularly amongst
Childhood is when you need to mix.
That's correct. That's correct. I mean, on the other side, they've tended to say that the very youngest children, because they know asymptomatic transmission amongst young children doesn't lead to illness, and that's the whole foundation for the government's policy. Coming back to the asymptomatic thing, and not only in Britain but everywhere in the world, was that children are not a vector of transmission into the wider population. The younger the children are, slightly older children perhaps, but even then it's unlikely, because they don't tend to come down seriously ill.
Should they close down universities and schools?
I don't think they should. No, I don't think they should. And the problem is they also introduced these sort of psychotic organisations. In the summer, they could have, for example, opened up the universities in the summertime and made it a more open environment. Again, introduced ventilation. I mean, I remember at the very beginning of all of this, the discussion about ventilation on buses was I said, look, get on a bus. When you get on a bus, and this was at the peak of the pandemic, open the windows. Get on a bus and sit down and put a mask on. It's not going to do any good if the windows aren't open. It's not going to do any good at all. The guy could open the doors. You put a barrier, open the doors. We used to have open door buses. You're not going to get it on an open door bus, right? So this was known all along. It's not a secret. Yet they could not be bothered to do anything about ventilation, which means they really weren't bothered about the pandemic at all. All they were really bothered about was how they can get, this is how pathetic they are. How much Matt Hancock's buddies and Dominic Cummings' buddies can get of the cake that's being given to them through plundering the taxpayer of future money by borrowing money in order to fund their campaign. And their campaign has been ineffective, useless, corrupt, and has landed us back in the chaos we're in at the moment. Chaos after chaos after chaos.
Are supermarkets a vector of spreading this?
I don't think they are. I mean, I haven't seen the evidence. The evidence basically was presented by Hancock one day, where he claimed there was a 75% higher rate of transmission amongst supermarket staff. But there was no evidence ever presented that supermarkets were a vector of transmission. So of course you could argue, okay, supermarket staff is standing in the building and people are coming in and out who like cough away and therefore it might gather in the air and they might get it. It would depend on the type of supermarket, but for example, local, any shops that got a reasonable airflow, it's not going to happen. And like my own supermarkets I've asked around, they've all said no. Apparently in the supermarket in Earl's Court, which is a very large supermarket, 3 people died. I heard that staff died. But that's a very large supermarket, quite a large number of staff. And if they caught it there, my guess would be it would be in, again, sort of changing rooms, a toilet, or a warehouse, or funnily enough in some of the cold storage areas. There seems to be some ongoing connection internationally, for example, in meatpacking plants. Meatpacking plants of everywhere you found outbreaks of, or food processing. Marks and Spencer's food processing of sandwiches, meatpacking plants in Britain, they've been detected all along as places where you get sudden large-scale transmissions amongst, 400 out of 700 staff or something like that. So clearly there's something about that, about relatively cool atmospheres with large numbers of workers enclosed in single spaces. So that's more likely to be the reason why people in supermarkets get ill, who staff. But I don't think there's any danger. I did used to think, at the beginning, I remember going in to the supermarket with the FFP3 mask on, which I showed you at the very beginning in March when I first came to Speaker's Corner. I had this FFP3 mask. I showed people how to use this. That's what stopped you getting coronavirus, because it's got filters in here that are designed to stop aerosol. All the other ones are just completely useless.
How much is one of those?
25 quid.
25.
25 quid in a DIY shop.
If it's not used properly, it's good.
Of course it is, of course. Having said that, these are sealed, very tightly sealed around the face, you see. That's
But
the
again,
point.
that's got valves on the exhaust, so you're going to protect yourself, but you're not going to protect anybody else.
That's true. You could transmit it to other people. You could, just perfectly true.
You'd be shedding all the time.
You could be, yes, you could do that.
Everybody
You could
has
do
to wear
it.
those.
So of course, pretty much in hospitals, you see, if they go into a serious, let's say the intubation thing, when they put someone on a ventilator, the fear of the doctors was in China at the time was that this might lead to a large expulsion of viral load in the room. And so they had to wear it to present. That was the theory at
But
the
if you're
time.
intubated, you're in a closed system. Your lungs are essentially
When they put it in and take it out, that's what they were
just
talking about.
the insertion extraction.
Yeah. I mean, which was very, in fact, this method, I mean, I haven't gone into looked in detail of it, but this method appears to be a very negative method for treating people anyway. I mean, large numbers of people die, and it was more about protecting the staff than about actually curing people. But I mean, as I said, in June, the Chinese published a study. It was all cheering the Chinese government and so on, but their study showed that at the end of the epidemic in China, they had reduced the death rate to below the normal death rate for viral pneumonia. So this means what people like Ilionides have said, and it's been published by the World Health Organization now. Ilionides published a study. He said the death rate is about, infection fatality rate is about 0.2%, 0.2 to 0.27%, something like that. And there was also interesting this week was that I found that the WHO is a bureaucratic institution, it's come under pressure from different groups. The British bought the biggest share of the WHO, but it's a 30% donation they are now. The biggest donor is now Britain is. And this happened simultaneously with Britain's launching of the moonshot program. And that's what this is all about in Britain now. It's all about the moonshot program. It's got nothing to do with, it's about getting Britain's influence up through influencing the WHO and influencing the world medical response, which means testing. And but the WHO published an article. I'll put it again underneath the video on the WHO website on the 14th of December about using the PCR test. And what did it say? It said the PCR test cannot be relied on. either positive or negative to diagnose someone, and you have to have a clinical diagnosis to justify your conclusion that someone's got COVID. And that was what the WHO itself said, which completely confirms what Bakhti, Yeadon, Vodak and others have said about this from the beginning. The PCR test is the reason we're in the chaos we are now, because the PCR test, they call, and you notice, if you ever see the newspapers, they'll always say PCR test, the gold standard test, they say, right? But actually the PCR test, what they mean is it's so sensitive that if I take a swab from the nose of a goose and I multiply it 45 times, as they often do in the amplification cycles, you may well find that goose test positive for COVID or for SARS-CoV-2. And therefore you'll be declaring that goose must be isolated, segregated, and you might laugh about that, but actually in the last few weeks is exactly what they've done. Just before Christmas, they had a sort of a type of bird flu outbreak in Britain, and they forced all the chickens into cages, or even the ones that were organic and free range.
Yeah, but we are being told to stay indoors.
Yeah.
I know none of us are obedient to that, but we are being told to stay indoors because that way we will reduce the chances.
Well, it's not true.
Hold on, reduce. We will be looking after the NHS. We will make sure that the NHS is able to function properly. What's your reaction to
the
that?
NHS has lost 10,000 beds because of social distancing measures. Yeah. Had they introduced air conditioning systems instead, this problem wouldn't have emerged. If the the transmissions inside the hospital constitute 25% of all transmissions. So a lot of people who are dying because they catch the virus inside hospital.
Where did you get that info from?
That's on the Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine in October. Yeah? centrebm.net. It's on the front page of it.
So the hospitals are responsible.
Hospital transmissions are about 25%.
Deaths that could be avoided.
Many of the deaths. I mean, there was a guy last week, a friend of a friend. He was an obese guy, a black guy. He went to hospital in December, just before Christmas. He had gout. Yeah. He had an arranged appointment, went to hospital, caught the virus in the hospital, and died 2 weeks later.
Yeah,
and it's not a rare thing. It's not a rare thing. Many of the deaths occurring now are occurring because of infections that happen inside hospitals. Yeah. And for people to stay, praise the NHS, cheer the NHS. The NHS is a bureaucratic institution, just like an army. Yeah. It's not a democratically controlled, scientifically monitored institution. It's been semi-privatized over the last 20 years. Right? And large numbers of beds. I don't know the exact figure, but about in year 2000, there were 224,000 beds. I think the figure now is 196,000 beds. So there's been a huge reduction in number of beds.
Social distancing, of course.
No, and then there's 10,000 less beds in the hospital. Yeah. There are less people in hospital this year now than there were last year. And that's because there aren't the beds in hospital because they're spreading them out, right? Had they introduced air conditioning systems that cleaned the air, they could have had even more beds in the hospitals. Plus the fact that the problem of internal hospital transmission is really related to what you do when you assess someone that come in a hospital. So if you go to hospital today, you break your leg, you go to hospital. If you go to hospital today, you're first put in a ward of people who are arriving. Now they could be heart patient, cancer patient, broken leg, COVID patient. They're all tested when they arrive at hospital. When they're tested, they're then segregated into, with the test, positive test, perhaps asymptomatic, negative test. Now, having a negative test, of course, doesn't mean you're going to remain negative. You might have caught it in that day when you're in a ward with someone who's got COVID. And so it can spread around the hospital like wildfire. As I said, a friend of mine who's a doctor told me about 2 months ago when she restarted, she'd been on pregnancy, maternity leave, when she restarted, extremely talented doctor, when she restarted at the hospital, she was put on directly on COVID treatment issues. She's working at the hospital at the moment. One day, one person, a week later, 100 people. A week later, 250 people inside the hospital.
I hear what you say, but at the end of the day, some people would argue that could be even a more sensible reason to stay at home.
But that's
I know I'm acting hypocritically,
but that is nothing to do with. You see, there's not a connection between me staying at home and me and someone catching a virus at a hospital. There's no connection. Or me staying at home and someone catching the virus. Or, because the idea, and that's what they're promoting, is that this idea that if we stand in Speaker's Corner and speak, that we're committing some offence because we're going to spread a virus. There's no evidence anyone caught the virus on Black Lives Matter. No evidence anyone caught the virus on the A-level student demonstrations. No evidence people caught the virus in Bournemouth Beach. Cornwall had the busiest summer season ever in history. The beaches were packed, the towns were packed. Nobody caught the virus in Cornwall. Cornwall remained the lowest level danger in the whole of the country right throughout until today. Right, or pretty much they've increased it now, but there's no real high infection rate in Cornwall, and nor in the anti-lockdown protest. But the point is, it's a political decision. We want to give the impression we're under control, which means we are introducing a strong lockdown. We must keep everyone at home. Everyone must obey. And it creates a psychology within the population that creates antagonism between one person and another, just like the old Brexit campaign. That's all they understand.
And a higher percentage of suicides, domestic violence.
I have no doubt whatsoever that the cumulative number of deaths and the number of quality life years that are going to be lost is going to way exceed all the deaths from COVID. No doubt whatsoever.
So you're saying that it's healthy to be out?
Of course it's healthy to be out.
We might
what
be
they should have done
is we are doing the right thing.
They should have opened up instead of a winter wonderland which is enclosed. They should have made little tented areas, heating, nice airflow, and we could have a lovely Christmas time, a lovely period in the winter where we come to the park here, where we've got areas where we can get warm, where we can communicate with each other, where we can learn from each other, and where people can assist each other.
Can I ask you another question? This is quite important, I think. We are a very, very small minority of people, okay? And we're all put in the same category as anti-vaxxers.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, nuts. Yeah.
How can you win hearts? Because I read that something like 80% of people agree with the government. They're for the government's policies.
Well, we don't know. Opinion polls nowadays, what are you doing? Isolating someone at home and asking online? Who knows what the actual opinion is? You can only judge it in your environment. I know people have changed their. I've changed my mind several times about many issues. You change your mind. So should any normal, natural person who's trying to find a solution to something. You're looking around at something that's new and you're trying to find a solution. The only people who've been right all along is the British government, of course. They've been the only country in the whole world who's been right. The fact that we happen to have a higher death rate than any other country in the world, of course, seems to pass them by, So it's about discovering, isn't it? Learning and discovering and trying to keep critical minds going.
Why have we got a higher death rate than other European countries?
I think it's mainly because Britain had this. The correlation I mentioned earlier on was one about the climate. This zone in the north and this zone in Americas, and a little bit in South Africa. But there's another correlation which has been very clearly demonstrated. Countries that had a rising life expectancy, strong economic growth, rising life expectancy. Of course, they reaches a point in your 80s, 70s and 80s where it begins to reach more difficult to improve life expectancy, right? So in many European countries, they'd reached this point about 2008. When the Great Recession came in 2008, life expectancy in many countries petered off, the increases petered off or declined. Alongside that is that the people in the lower classes, the working class people, the poor, they were more likely to suffer from what they call non-communicable diseases. So cancer, heart disease, strokes and so on. And these people then, their treatment began to be worse. It was more difficult to get a doctor's appointment. The resources were not given to the NHS over the last 10 years. Number of beds in hospitals declined, the facilities for doctors declined, the time spent between doctor and patient declined. The consequence of that was that the illnesses they had are not properly treated. And the consequence of that, and that was covered by Richard Horton in The Lancet in his article called COVID-19 is not a pandemic, which he published in June this year, I believe it was. And it shows that there's a combination of an external agent, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, provoking COVID-19, connected with comorbidities which can be treated adequately, but in Britain and a number of other countries was not, because their living standards have been rising, life expectancy had been rising, began to taper off, and that led to a gulf this layer who've got comorbidities, whose life expectancy has been tapering off, and that layer was the ones overwhelmingly who were killed. So it's a very specific group. It's not the world's population. It's a very specific group of people who've been killed by this. And Britain had a lot of them. That's the truth. Including, unfortunately, my friend and comrade who died a few days ago.
So 2019 was quite a low death rate.
That's also true. That's also true. An interesting thing, there was a piece I saw this morning as well, is that in certain countries they have a relatively high a rate of change in the death rates associated with respiratory illnesses. And they showed that a number of countries in Europe, those same countries are the ones that had the highest death rate now. And the ones that had relatively low incidences over late 10 years of respiratory illnesses didn't get it. So, for example, Greece, a lot of the East European countries and so on. Okay, I think covered quite a lot of subjects. Anything else anyone wants to say?
Do you think it's only to do with contagion, or is this about essentially power grab from the governments around the world?
I think it's a bit of both. You know, I think there's a genuine. I mean, I never disputed that it was a genuine virus. Or whether the virus is a mutation from previous viruses is another question. I mean, it could be. You know, I have a speculative thought. I don't have the evidence for it, but my speculative thought is SARS actually never went away. The original SARS never went away and circulated in different forms, mutated, and came back in this form. I could be wrong, but that's a working hypothesis I've got that I will eventually look into. I haven't looked into it yet, so if someone wants to contradict me on that, do so. You know, send me the papers and I'll look at it. But a power grab is certainly what is going on. There is a massive global power grab and a centralisation of executive power all around the world. Whether that will succeed in every country is another question. You know, in India, Modi was in a very strong position before the pandemic. Now, after the pandemic, he's been weakened. And so, you know, in some ways he's strengthened because he's using force and batons and so on. But on the other side, when you lose the support of the masses, you're in big danger. And that seems to be the case with Modi. You know, and in China, funnily enough, the government has also ran into difficulty because the Chinese government is a government that is dependent upon popular support. Any dictatorship has to in some way have popular support, otherwise it has to have massive weapons of repression, right? So either a ubiquitous repression or some degree of popular support on which it can base itself. And the way they base themselves there is to offer resources and facilities like the Soviet Union did, resource and facilities to the masses. Now the problem is that after the pandemic, the demand of the masses for healthcare has been much greater. They're saying, why aren't we getting it? Why do you get it? Why don't we get it? And so the consequence of that is that the Chinese government has had to move, at least economically, to the left. And so they began, for example, now it looks like they're about to nationalize one of the biggest technology companies in the world, Alibaba. It looks like they're about to do that. And that's because they want to gain control of resources to allow them to facilitate improvements in the living standards of the masses so they don't make a revolution and hang them from the trees. You know, so that's how I understand that anyway. But I do agree there is a dangerous and real power grab internationally by governments, by state, but if you like, by state bureaucracies, I think is the key to misunderstand. It's state bureaucracies.
Which is the scary bit.
That's true. I mean, that certainly is. It is scary. And for example, Mike Yeadon speaks about the SAGE Committee. The SAGE Committee's got three wings. One is a psychological operation to manipulate the population. Another is a modelling operation to analyse potential models, and the other is non-pharmaceutical interventions. So it's about lockdowns and this sort of thing. I don't think one single one of them has worked. But one interesting thing is Yeadon points out there are 7 people on every committee. And these people have got inordinate amount of power, never been elected, and yet they're making decisions about the future of billions of pounds of resources and the lives of tens of millions of people. And without any democratic observation, control, or challenge. And if you post something on the internet that challenges it, they ban it. So this is what we've got. We have not Copban? No, it's not Copban. So we have dictatorial power being used, and of course nobody, when they've got dictatorial powers, nobody likes to give them up. They don't. And so, of course, we've entered a very dangerous era. And really behind it is the crisis of global capitalism. Capitalism was about to enter a massive crisis like 2008 last year, or the beginning of last year. And instead of this, we had a collapse orchestrated around the pandemic to make it look like the economic collapse is caused by the pandemic. It wasn't caused by the pandemic, but it's the knock-on effects were were pandemic measures, but there was an inherent crisis of the capitalist system anyway. Now there are people who had a solution to this, the Great Reset people, Charles Schwab and so on, and their solution is to introduce in some of the richest countries a basic minimum income so we can silence the petty bourgeois, the people who've all lost their jobs in hospitality, lost their jobs in entertainment, or they'll get like £800 a month. That's the long-term aim. So when the furlough ends, that's what they'll get. And then millions of people will be unemployed. Millions of people who thought they were quite well off, middle-class people who are now working at home thinking, I'm pandemic safe, they're going to discover they've been Uberized. They can be at a press of a button, they can be sacked. That guy in Argentina's taken your job. And so we've had a global transformation of the socio-economic system, which people aren't prepared for. They really don't understand quite how dramatic the changes that are taking place in the economic sphere and in the future of their life are going to be. It's going to be extraordinary dramatic changes. Education, for example, they turn these universities into online education centres. Well, then what do? Well, they can't get the money. You can't squeeze £9,000 out of a student in England for an online course, right? So all the students are going to be up in arms by the summertime. So how do they get the money then? Then they make a global course, right? We're no longer Birmingham University based in Birmingham. We're Birmingham everywhere. And therefore Birmingham University offers, let's say, 1 million students a course at £1,000 a year each, instead of £9,000 a year for 20,000 students. And that's the game. And it's a global game pushed by technology. Imagine, those of you who are old enough, imagine that the AIDS crisis had come at a time of ubiquitous internet. How would we have responded? At the time, we used to get a leaflet through the door, television notice, and that was it. And then rumour and paranoia and fear. Everyone thought you could catch it off touching at something. Same idea, initially. But had that happened now, and we didn't know about any, AIDS or COVID, then of course so of course now these people are going to come with solutions all the time. mRNA vaccine, that's why they're all going on about it. Why do they want the mRNA vaccine? Because you can manufacture these for everything. You can find in that plant some virus that can affect man. When you find the RNA strand of it, you can make an mRNA vaccine. You can inject someone and protect you against the danger that you touch that plant and get a virus from it. And so they've got a perfect, again, one of these mad, if you like, money-making schemes where as long as people believe in it, they'll be able to sell unlimited quantities of mRNA vaccines for anything.
Again, you very quickly get to the point where it's nothing to do with money, it's about control.
Yes, I'm not disputing any of this, but what the exact outlines of the parameters of that control will be in future, we don't know. We're in a topsy-turvy world. There are global crises taking place, battling between each other. I tend to think, as I've said over many years, that the modelers have managed to gain a significant influence, and the artificial intelligence brigade, a significant influence in world capitalism. And so people like Neil Ferguson, who always, every time there was any illness, he predicted a catastrophic collapse of the world. And so now he can say, I'm vindicated, look at me, I was right all along. But the same thing is true for the climate. Everyone says that the climate's going, CO2 emission gone up, the climate's going to go up, the world will be destroyed. It was interesting. One of the interesting things last year was, where did the fires go? The year before, fires. The whole world was in flames, remember?
Especially
Greta Thunberg was on telly every day and the whole world was on flames. Last year, I don't think there was a fire in Hyde. The first fire I saw was over in Hyde Park Lane a couple of minutes ago. No, but they weren't going on about it. That's the point. The emphasis did not exist. Plastic in the ocean disappeared from the news, right? The year before, it was the main news in the earth. Plastic the size of Antarctica. Sorry?
Those horrible cheap masks.
Yeah, well, that'll be the next one.
Well,
masks in the sea and COVID. And they've already don't forget this, they already found COVID in the sea.
Well, they would do.
In England. No, they went to the sea, they did a test. PCR test, found COVID. I mean, does that mean you catch COVID swimming in the sea?
Can you catch it eating fish?
Well, the funny thing is, the ultra paranoia in China meant that they began to think this. So they found positive tests in C4 detectable level of virus from that, which just means that it's there on your nose and you swab it and there it is. It doesn't mean you're going to come down ill. So anyway, I think it's enough for today.
Yeah.
All right. Nice to see you guys here.
Good job.
Are you walking back that way?
Yeah. We've got to go back, haven't we?
Switch it off or?
Yeah, let's call it a halt now. It's been going on for hours.